Hello, this is Kevin Stoda again, speaking on the 30th anniversary of the revolutions of 1989. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Kevin Stoda. I hope you like it and you're willing to share and participate. If you have any questions, I'll stop and answer some of them. But I will be reading from writing notes of mine as to keep on track of what we're supposed to be doing. And I'll remind you that the earlier portions of this series, the revolutions of 1989, focused on what was happening in Hungary, what was happening in Czechoslovakia, what was happening in Russia, what was happening in China in 1989, and the years leading up to the changes. Now, I'm going to introduce this new topic because it's mostly going to focus on what's happening in East Germany. But it's true that similar sort of activities were occurring in Poland and across Europe. Let me share now. Was the collapse of communism less related to globalization than to the simple fact that the people wanted to change in 1989 at a time when the majority of leaders were for, as we say, for a change, willing to join the masses in attaining change? Or did the people just run ahead and the politicians have to follow? What happened in 1989? What was happening in the 1980s in Europe? What was the role of the church and other protest leaders, such as those in environmentalist movements? What lessons can we learn from the pre-collapse Europe of 1989 and before that? This is again part 7 of the revolutions of 1989. I'm contextualizing the church's role, and this is the originally we had talked about Tiananmen Square, so I'll start here with what was happening in Germany, in contrast to what we did in the earlier parts. It was early June 1984 as I found myself working in strawberry fields in the western end of the Rhineland-Palatinate in Germany, in what was Western Germany at the time, the part of Germany directly north of Alsace and Lorraine, a part of France that 2 world wars were fought over. I was there as part of an exchange program between Europeans and North Americans. It had been dating, this sort of exchange had been going on since after World War II. After World War II, Mennonite churches in the USA had begun to bring Germans and other Europeans over to work in America for a year or so in hospitals, to do internships, to work on farms and in schools. In short, we believed in allowing people to come and rub shoulders with us. That's to be contrasted with the life in America now, where there seems to be all kinds of hatred towards foreigners and people who bring other ways of looking at the world. And we simply want them to, as the Japanese would say, get in their place. And if they get out of their place, we'll hammer them back in. The purpose of the trainee program, the intermental training program, was part of a trend in the USA and around the world. There were a lot of sister city programs. And Eisenhower, who's also from Kansas, like me, promoted the sister city programs. But there were all kinds of other people-to-people exchanges on both sides of the war taking place from the 1940s, 50s, and onwards. These face-to-face work or training exchanges that I were involved with continued well into the 21st century. I want to add here that I really believe in doing homestays, and I think that you should consider doing one in a foreign country. You can catch more of this if you watch the video I did on Wakari Mashtaka about when I was living in Japan, and I met families, Japanese families of multi-generations, and was able to finally get an insight into the country. In other words, the reason I found myself working on a farm with a European Mennonite family in 1983 and 1984 was because I was an intermental trainee on a 12-month program. I was able to take part in all kinds of cultural exchanges at that time, and including ones related to the peace movement. You see, the Europeans had agreed over 5 years earlier, and I'm talking about the strawberry field right now, to allow the Soviet Union to build a pipeline from this, Russia or Siberia, all the way through to Germany and on to France. And it was this pipeline that was going under the humble strawberry patch in Rhineland-Palatinate, where I was working and living with a Mennonite church family. The family was named Ernst. I stayed with them and worked with them, and I had planted strawberries on that particular field where this pipeline was going through just some time earlier in the spring. Even as the Cold War Persian Missile Crisis created a great cultural and political conflict from 1979 to 1983 period in Germany, the Central European lands and Eastern European states said we can work together on this Trans-Siberian pipeline, connecting and anchoring East and West Europe economically. And that was all part of the European community's idea of how to solve the post-war without having further wars since 1945. And this all extended right down to the level of the strawberry fields in which I was working with near an American military base and an airport named Ramstein. In short, just under the noses of U.S. military and under the rise of America's national defense in the 1980s, Western Europe was looking to tie itself even more peacefully and economically, politically, and culturally with peoples on various continents through people-to-people exchange as well as economic and other resource exchanges. They were doing this despite Reagan's attempt to create a fear in the minds of the world that the Soviet Union was the evil empire and wanted only the worst for the West. The Soviet Union to France gas pipeline comes through now as I am planting 1 week there, and then the next week they're digging up the field of strawberries to put them in. I remember the people were working there and having to put the pipeline in. Since they bought the strawberries, that they were going through and digging up for the pipeline, they said "Schade auf dem Erdbeeren." That means too bad for the strawberries, but they were eating them and enjoying them anyway. So in January, I should say in April of 2019, some 30 years after the completion of the Trans-Siberian pipeline to France, there's a new threat to peaceful coexistence between Eastern and Western Europe. And this could arise after the tit-for-tat gas pipeline shutdowns that we saw 5 to 10 years ago, and could also be the result of the wars in Crimea and Ukraine. Are we going to see the end of this good relationship between East and West in our lifetime? It sure looks like Donald Trump wants this to happen. Back in 1984, though, the Mennonite farmer for whom I was an intermental trainee, Georg Ernst, in Rhineland-Palatinate, would soon be reimbursed for allowing these pipeline to go through his field by the German government and the regional governments. Nonetheless, it is always sad when one has to stand by and watch 3 years of hard labor plowed up in the name of progress, i.e. pipeline. In fact, 1984 eventually saw the natural gas begin to flow between East and West, right through our strawberry field and onto France. Personally, I have an enduring image of the Trans-Siberian pipeline lane workers stopping for a few hours to pick strawberries on their own and to take them home near that Mittelbrunn village where I was watching the strawberries that part of the year. And this memory has remained for me with me for decades. Naturally, I had to recall this whole episode again and again over various winters when it was discovered that we in the West, including Germany, are overdependent on the Russian bear for energy, and this could continue to hurt others. But Germany has solved this problem to some degree by committing itself to um, sustainable energy sources like no other country in Europe. As these rugged-looking Trans-Siberian pipeline layers chewed on their strawberries and said, "Schade auf den Erdbeeren," too bad for the strawberries. I I looked at the workers. I said to myself, "Too bad for the strawberries, but maybe good for Europe." And a few minutes later, these very same workers of heavy machinery took buckets and baskets of their strawberries and began to plow through the field. Um, and I hadn't even gone to cross over into Iron Curtain yet when I was in Germany in uh, 1984. It wouldn't be till 2 or 3 years later that I actually went to East Berlin for the first time, and then began to explore other states. Years later, a few years later, I would visit Hungary, and I found unbelievably new freedoms for the Magyar citizens who could work abroad and return each year, including my friend Georgi, who went from Hungary to study technologies in France. Uh, I stayed with Georgi when I first went to visit Hungary, and I was very happy that there was an educational program for him to go to France to get to know the West long before the collapse of the Soviet Union. Georgi would later, as I mentioned in an earlier video, Georgi would be on site when the collapse of the Soviet Union took place. He was sent over because he was Hungarian, he wasn't Westerner, and he could film what was going on CNN, for CNN, showing the tanks and the collapse of the attempted coup of Gorbachev. Georgi had taken his learning opportunities seriously. This wasn't always true of many people involved in the exchanges, but he did. He spent his time learning how Western company functions and how they solve their problems. But his state uh, owned telecom company that he was working for, many of the other people spent the time in Paris just partying and celebrating. That's sad, but that happens again and again when Westerners go to Europe. Instead of really forging and getting good relations, we don't always take time to get to know people, go home with them, or invite them home. The same thing when we look at other corners of the world, in Africa. Yeah. Hey, good night, Kenzie. Do you want to say hi to the people on my YouTube?
Hello.
Okay. I didn't see you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm talking to them about when I was in Europe, and it was before, long before you were born. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I will continue and get back to my story. Um, Good night, Kenzie. I know it's late. um, During the same era that I was in the strawberry fields of Western Germany, a friend of mine from my alma mater, Mark Jansen, went uh, from first to Wuppertal University, where I attended later, and then on to Humboldt University in East Berlin, where he studied theology in the 1980s. I was, like I said, with a fairly religious family in Western Germany, and he was working with the Mennonites to get information about the East back to the West through their publications. Thank you, Kenzie. The West German Green Party sent a delegation in the 1980s to visit Erich Honecker, who had criticized, and they had criticized him and the human rights publicly on TV in both East and West Germany. The Green Party openly kept relations, though, with both the communist chairman, Honecker's party, and many dissidents in East Germany throughout the 1980s. To various other degrees, there were other parties, peace groups, churches, and student groups who encouraged East-Western exchanges throughout the 1980s. Similarly, the West German courts became more and more lenient on West German peace protesters during the 1980s, especially after the Pershing Missile Crisis of 1983 unfolded. This was a marked change from their treatment in 1968 and through most of the 1970s, when the protesters were treated badly, and you see it in the media quite often. Or you saw it in the media quite often. As NATO stationed missiles and other weapons tipped with nuclear warheads in 1983 that would land across the Iron Curtain in East Germany and neighboring states, millions of Germans and West Europeans protested. Again, I was there. In 1983, the Warsaw Pact saw this kind of protest as being in their own interest and something that they supported. In short, peace protests protest against the remilitarization of the further militarization or the further militarization of Germany in the West was often mirrored in East Germany and its developments. According to various East German researchers, the roots of the organized opposition involving the independence peace movement go back to the early 1960s in Eastern Germany, when considerable resistance emerged in East Germany's attempts to remilitarize, especially in Protestant circles. In the late 1970s and 1980s, Protestant activists objected to the introduction of other weapons. And in the summer of 1978, there was compulsory pre-military training in Eastern Germany for 15 to 16-year-olds. Soldiers who had fulfilled their military obligation through work in special military construction units pressured Lutheran church leaders to support nonviolence and disarmament. In February of 1982, the term peace movement began to be used in connection with peace initiatives that originated outside official party or government circles. This is, again, we're talking about Eastern Germany. The initiative stemmed from a forum organized by the Lutheran Church that challenged the official government view that peace can be maintained only through armed strength. In the mid-1980s, the independent peace movement, which had sought the formation of civilian peace service as an alternative to military service, worked towards this end in the demilitarization of Eastern German society. I'm going to take a break here and invite you to comment if you'd like. In the meantime, I will ask you to send me any thoughts or questions you have about this program. I really appreciate it.